Hi guys, and welcome back to Pass and Move. And for today's episode in our Tactics and Team Guide series, we do have Brighton. It's not Reading, don't worry, that's why we're all in blue. So it's going to be about Brighton, the Premier League newcomers for this season. Very interesting team to take over and a huge challenge, in fact, and we'll discuss more about it why. But in terms of what we'll be covering, of course, we do mention that's about Tactics and Team Guide, and what that means is obviously creating a tactic that hopefully should get the best out of your squad, and at the same time just giving advice on who you should keep, who you should sell, probably areas to invest in. Just kind of sort of just go through all these little tabs, I guess, if you want to call them tabs, all of the ones here, and just go through it one by one with you guys, and hopefully just try and give you the best support and advice to try and win as much as possible with Brighton. So let's start with the very first thing, which is what are the aims from the board. So they want you to avoid relegation. That's the expectation. For the Premier League, for the FA Cup is 4th round, and Carabao Cup or the League Cup is in the 3rd round. So you enter just a single round before your expectation, so you just kind of have to beat one team each. So if you do that, you'll be okay. In terms of the Premier League, it actually is going to be a huge and difficult challenge for you guys. I feel Brighton are not set up for Premier League competition whatsoever. A lot of their squad members aren't good enough for the division, and that's why it's going to be a bit tough. So in terms of the first team, you have a squad of 23 people, so you only need 22 players in truth. What I like to do and what I advise is to have a first 11 of leading players for the division and a backup 11 of players who have potential to become leading or world class or star players even for the division. So that's kind of the balance that you should be looking for. That way no one's really complaining about game time, and you have a good enough, strong enough squad and good squad depth as well to actually challenge for the title. But for now, of course, the first thing is to do is actually try and get to stay in the division. So you kind of have to aim a bit low in the beginning. So start off with trying to build a squad of decent players for the division, and then building a squad of good players for the division, and then so on and so forth until you're a top squad. And of course, it depends on the budget. Sometimes you can jump ahead and get someone who's a good player for the division. Sometimes you're only going to find decent players. But the point is to actually turn this squad around, because a lot of them are only championship players. So we'll go through them one by one. But one of the first things I like to do is obviously see which staff or coaching staff in particular, their judgment of ability I can trust. So just having a look at my staff at the moment, it looks like Ben Roberts, the goalkeeping coach, has the best judgment of ability and potential. You could probably trust your assistant manager as well, but in terms of potential, you'd probably maybe better off not trusting him. Head of youth development could definitely do some work, of course. I mean, if your head of youth development's a 10 on either side, that's a bit worrying, and have to consider what he's working with youngsters. Working with youngsters is okay. So yeah, now we know which judgment of ability we can actually check, who's suited for the division. But one of the other things is having a look at the under 23s and under 18 squads. So you try and find players who are ready for your first team. So Oliver Norwood maybe would have been a good addition to the team, but you definitely can't recall him from his loan. But there is someone, for example, like Alice Matiju. He's only a championship player though, so apparently he's not ready, and it's unlikely that anyone else here is going to be ready if he's not. But what you can also do is actually have a look at the age. So anyone above 23, you don't want to be keeping in the under 23 years, and that means you've got a couple of players here, 3 in fact, and you can consider selling them or keeping them in your squad, really depending. We'll have a look now. So take us back to our actual squad, and sorting in terms of best ability, it looks like the squad, if we just pick the best 11 players in the team, it looks like the squad is most suited to a 4-2-3-1 formation just by looking at it. But of course, the problem with the 4-2-3-1 formation is a bit too attacking for a club like Brighton. We need to be playing defensive football as much as possible, so it's kind of an issue that we have a 4-2-3-1. I feel like Brighton, in terms of their history, they did quite well in the championship. See, they were in 2nd, so they're one of the top teams in the championship, which is why they have a squad set up for attacking football. But once they've come into the Premier League, they have a squad of players who are just not good enough for the division, and they also have the issue to deal with, which is a lot of them are attacking players rather than defensive. We can't really create a defensive formation. So we're going to work with the 4-2-3-1. I'll talk more about the tactics itself, but in terms of what you should be working with, we know at least the formation now, which is a 4-2-3-1. So now we can consider squad numbers and whatnot. So Ryan is going to be a first choice goalkeeper, Matthew Ryan. Decent player for most division sides. There's also Tim Krul, who's I thought was a decent buy, but apparently he's only good enough for Sky Bet Championship and only considered a good player, not even a leading one. So he's had quite the drop in terms of ability, but he's a backup, and you might be better off selling him and bringing in a youngster who has a lot of potential and who can eventually take over from Matthew Ryan. Henrique as well, who we just bought up from the under-23s, is only a decent player for Sky Bet Championships. So if you sell these two, 1.5 million here and another 9 million here, you've got 10.5 million to work with, and you can certainly, if not bring in a player, for example. You basically have two choices with everything that you do right now, at every position. You either invest in a good player for the division, for example. Matthew Ryan's only a decent player, so if you bring in a good player for the division, then that good player becomes the first teamer and Matthew Ryan becomes the backup. But obviously you have a bit of an issue at hand here, which is Matthew Ryan is used to being a first teamer, so if you decrease his status, then he might complain. But you can always try that way and hope for the best, and hope that he'll be okay with it, and if he doesn't, then you can eventually sell him. Your other choices, of course, just keep Matthew Ryan as a first choice and bring in a youngster whose potential, who's ready for the first division first of all, and who can eventually overtake from Matthew Ryan by becoming a leading player or a good player for the division for that matter. But yeah, definitely Tim Krul and Henrique, you're not needed for the squad. They're not good enough for the division, so not good enough for the team. Right back is a huge issue because neither of these players are decent players for the division. You've got a good player for Sky Bet Championship, and we'll go on all the way down for some reason, and a good player for the Sky Bet Championship. So not good enough. But Bruno is the first choice. He's used to first team football, 36 years of age, Spanish player. A fullback naturally. He's got decent physicals considering his age. Natural fitness of 20 certainly helps with that. And he's a decent player, but you will have to try and move him on as soon as possible. Both the players, really, you need a decent player for the division at least, and then a backup youngster with tons of potential. Really, it depends on where you can invest in. We'll talk more about money later on, but yeah, that's an area of concern. Centre-back is another issue as well. All of these players here are only considered championship players, so none of your defending parts of your defending at least don't seem to be ready for the division at all, so that's a concern. Not even your first team. If it's your squad depth that's an issue, we can kind of deal with that because you can kind of try and rely on your first teamers, but here you can't even do that. Both Shane Duffy and Lewis Dunk are going to be your first teamers, but they are only leading players for the Sky Bet Championship, so that's another area of concern. You might want to sell the backups, for example, Uwe, I guess, and Connor Goldson. You have to check if they've bought them. No, they haven't bought them this season, so you could probably sell both of them for a fair amount and bring in two youngsters who can overtake Shane Duffy and Lewis Dunk, possibly. Marcus Suttner and Gaetan Bong are going to be your left backs. This is a fairly better depth, but still not good enough. Sky Bet Championship as well, and once more with Gaetan Bong, Sky Bet Championship, but he's only a good player, so you might be better off selling him first and bringing in another player. Gaetan Bong is for 4.2 million. You might do well selling the Cameroonian international. I think you could get a decent amount of money from him, and you may consider for at least the first season before all those finances kick in, the Premier League money, you could possibly just sign in a bunch of loanees and hope for the best. In terms of your centre mids, you have a couple of options really. You have 5, but you only need spots for 4, so it's a good thing that one of them, Davy Proper, can play an attacking mid, and that's exactly where we're going to see him, a Dutch international, one of your key players in the squad, and worth quite a bit of money. But in terms of his ability, good player for the most Premier League sides, so he's one of your key players. You're really going to want to bring the best out of this attacking midfielder here, and we're hoping to do that by pushing him up further the field as well. In terms of actual centre mids though, Steve, Berham, Dale and Pascal, and your first team combination in midfield is actually going to be Pascal, who's a decent player for the division, and Dale, who's only a Sky Bet Championship, so that's a bit of a concern. You will need to get someone in who's better than Dale, and of course the backup, Berham and Steve are both not good enough for the division either, so you're going to have to try and move them on, and you think you could do with a fair bit of money. I just want to say now, before anyone does anything, do not sell your players without being completely confident that you'll be able to replace them with ease. So it's better off, always in my opinion, if you don't have the numbers, if you've got extra players, then it kind of makes sense to sell first and then buy, but to buy first and then you can sell later, that's not an issue. But when you do have exactly 22 players, for example, you can't afford to sell someone and you realize, oh, there's no one on the market, I can't buy anyone, someone gave up on me, for example, and it fell through at the last moment, so I don't have the numbers now, that type of thing. Always invest first and then sell the player that you don't need later. Unless, of course, you're absolutely confident, for example, of selling this guy, Steve Sidwell, for 550k, and you know there's someone that you can 100% bring in for 500k, for example, then that's good to go. You have to bear in mind, of course, that you might not necessarily get all the money that you sell him for. Depends on your your board's transfer strategy, I suppose. In terms of right winger, you do have a couple of options. This is where actually the squad is fully stocked in, I suppose. You do have fairly good attacking strength, to be honest, but it comes in the form of Anthony Knockaert, and he's a decent player for most Premier League sides, and I think, he can play as a shadow striker possibly as well. I think he's quite suited to that role, but he has some decision-making and aggression issues as well, strength. So you might be better off playing him as an inside forward and hope the decision-making isn't affected too much. It also helps that he cuts inside from the right wing, so it's good to see as well. And yeah, that's your first choice player in terms of that side. And you've also got Ezekiel Shulato, who's a decent player for the division, so that's good enough. He'll provide adequate cover for Knockaert. He can play as a right back. This is kind of where you have a decision to make. I'd just like to talk about this for a second. So he's very capable in the right back spot in terms of his being comfortable playing there. But the reason why I want to push him up further is that he's much suited to the winger position much more. He runs with the ball down the right, plays short, simple passes, and he hugs the line as well. The only issue is his first touch. Now, the problem with playing him in a wing-back, in my opinion at least, is he doesn't have good enough marking, tackling, or positioning for a full-back, and of course concentration is an issue as well. You're going to be expected to defend for large periods of time, and with concentration kind of low, not that low, but kind of low, it's a bit of an area of concern. So he doesn't seem too naturally he doesn't seem to be a natural full-back is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, that's just why I want to push him up. But again, you have to consider your right back spot. Both the players there aren't good enough for the Premier League, so you might want to consider playing Ezekiel there because he is good enough for the Premier League as well. But you would have to provide them with decent cover so that he doesn't expose your team time and time again. It's all down to you how you want to decide that. That obviously leaves you with another spot, which is Solly's place. With Solly, he can become a decent player, but he's not ready for the Premier League just yet, so you might be better off sending him out on loan. If you desperately need the money, maybe you could sell him. In terms of when you've had him, you've kind of had him for the majority of his career, so you can sell him. It's not like he just came in and then you can't get rid of him, for example. But yeah, decent English talent, under 21 international, and I think he could be ready for your team. He suits really well because if he is an inside forward, that's perfect for you. That is kind of the role that we're going for. We'll talk more about that in a sec. But you might be better off sending him out on loan for this season, and hopefully when he comes back next season, he's ready for the Premier League and he can slot into your team either as a backup or starter, depends on how he develops. So that's left wingers. Attacking midfielders, we talked about already Davy playing there. He's a good player for the division, I think. And his backup, Izzy Brown, is a loanee, but he's only Championship football. So this is where you kind of have a decision to make. I think you can terminate his loan, so you might be better off cancelling that loan and bringing in someone who's actually ready for the division. And in terms of wages, you are paying 25k for his wages, so you might be better off putting that money in a different kind of investment instead, and bringing in someone better. It kind of makes a bit more sense. Left wing, you've got 3 players here, but you only need 2, of course, like we mentioned. First choice player for that position is Jose Izquierdo. A decent player for the division. He can maybe even improve into a good player for the division. He's an inside forward, and he has the versatility of being able to play as a striker and attacking midfielder and all those sort of positions. Colombian international as well, so that will do good. Stats are very nice other than vision, but he seems to be quite a good player for your squad. So yeah, that's why we need to try and get the best out of this, these type of players. The players are actually ready for the first team, and hopefully the others won't be exposed. Jiri is a good player for the division, and where's the other guy? Jamie Murphy is a good player for the division. So this is where you kind of have a choice depending on who you want to sell. Neither of them are necessarily going to improve. If you ask me, it kind of makes more sense, because you have to consider a couple of things. So for example, Jiri, he's right-footed and he's an inside forward, but he's more comfortable playing as a winger. If you were to consider his inside forward support role, he's not necessarily suited to that too much. Acceleration is a bit poor, decision making, off the ball finishing, and vision, and that's a huge part of being an inside forward, so you might be better off moving him on. Jamie Murphy's kind of a, I suppose, more natural inside forward, and maybe he might be a bit more suited to your role, but again, not good enough for the Premier League, so you do have to consider that. Strikers, you've got 3 of them, but you only need 2 again, but none of them are good enough for your team. So Tom Mohamed is the target man. He is going to be the star striker for you, leading player for Sky Bet Championship. That kind of really sums up your squad. Sam Baldock is a good player, and you've got also Glenn Murray, who's a good leading player for the division. So your weakest one is actually Sam Baldock, and he's injured for 3 to 4 months anyway, so it's unlikely you'll be able to move him on straight away, but maybe you can move him on in the winter. But possibly by the time winter comes around, Glenn Murray's ability would decline even further. Plus you also have to consider things like, does he suit my squad? He seems to be capable of a number of different roles, and he might be a decent player for you, but again, not good enough for the division. So striker is really another area of concern in your squad. So that's kind of just going through everyone, and that leads to the tactics. So we are set up as a 4-2-3-1. What we're actually going to try and achieve here is by... Actually, you know what? Let me just go back for just a second. So there's a couple of other things I want to tell you guys to consider. So Beram, he's out for 3 to 4 months. So you might be better off bringing Loney up until winter time. That's what I want to talk about, the injuries. Anthony Knockhart, you can survive with 3 to 6 weeks. By that time, hopefully the Premier League wouldn't have just started just about. So that's okay. You don't need to bring in anyone to replace him. But Izzy Brown, for example, you know, he's out for 2 to 3 months as well. So that's another con, the pro and con list. That kind of goes into the con list as well as him not being ready for the division. Sam Baldock, we already talked about 3 to 4 months, but again, you don't need to rely on him anyways because Glenn Murray's there and you've got the numbers for the striker position. So yeah, just the main concern really is Beram. You might need to bring in another central midfielder unless you want to address other areas in your squad. But back to tactics, 4-2-3-1, this is what we're going with. We'll go through each role as it is, but the aim is really to just work with the team we've got. So we're playing a very attacking formation, right? And a lot of these players are suited to, they're passing players. They're not sort of very basic, no technical skill sort of players. It's just that their ability doesn't match their attributes, for example. So they're not good enough for the division, but they do have decent attributes. So we're trying to, kind of work with what we've got. And at the same time try and play with a mentality that's not going to expose us too much, because playing a 4-2-3-1 was already very risky, and so if we played with control or attacking, that's a bit too much. We're playing on counter, and the aim is really to try and retain possession, and 4-2-3-1 suits possession football, sorry. And so that's what we're kind of going with. So we've got counter, we've got structure on team shape to try and keep things as simple as possible, and keep things tight at the back. Also, just having a single team instruction in the shape of shorter passing. Now, I always mention in my tactics and team guides, but I'm one of those people who just does not like tons of team instructions. I like the player roles to do their jobs basically, so I don't want to put too much instruction. We're just going on shorter passing to try and keep possession a bit more. You can also go for retain possession instead of shorter passing, but if you're one of those people who really likes to have a bunch of instructions, you can definitely do a bunch of things to keep possession even further, like retain possession with shorter passing, with lower tempo, with work the ball into the box, for example, things like that. You could definitely go for it. But yeah, this is kind of what I'm going for, possession football while playing relatively safe. Possession football is not what everyone thinks, which is, playing risky. Possession football is actually quite risk-free football, because you're trying to keep the ball as much as possible, and it's not like free-flowing football at all, and that's why we're playing with a counter mentality. You can even actually go into defensive when you're playing tougher teams. I'm just suggesting counter so that you can actually counter your opposition as well, and you're likely to be able to catch a lot of the teams you're playing against in the Premier League on the break, because you are considered one of the weaker teams in the division, so it doesn't make sense to play on control or attacking even. So playing on counter means that they'll be coming at you and you can hit them on the break, hopefully. So that kind of explains all of the tactics. In terms of the player roles, it sort of suits the team and at the same time suits the players. So target man on attack definitely doesn't really suit the team instructions or the rest of the thing that we're going for. But at the same time, it's just what he works with best. And playing with shorter passing should hopefully reduce the lobbed balls forward. We don't have centre backs who are capable of actually playing as central defenders. They're only defensive centre backs, so they're going to be lobbing the ball forward anyways. And hopefully, doing shorter passing will help play less stupid balls. In terms of the goalkeeper, sweeper, keeper, support, that's just what Matthew Ryan's most comfortable with. But if you ask me, I would love just playing a regular goalkeeper role. I'm not comfortable playing sweeper, keeper. If I have to, I would do it on defend. I would definitely not do it on support, but it really is up to personal preference. There's no real advantage in terms of him suiting the rest of the tactical style. That there's nothing to do with it at all. It's just what he prefers. When you play Tim Krul, he'll be a normal goalkeeper anyways. So defensive centre backs is what we already talked about. They don't have the best mentalities, such as concentration, which you really need for central defender, but they do have some decent attributes. Like the play we were just on, he had some decent ball playing ability. Central defender here, for example, doesn't have any composure, that type of thing, so you're better off just playing in their most comfortable role. But if you feel like they're being a bit too stupid with the ball, you can definitely go back to central defender and just hope that Lewis Dunk doesn't get his concentration caught out. Everything else he's kind of okay with in terms of mental ability. We've got a wing back on attack in Sutner, and that's just to complement the inside forward on support here. That works quite well, and just to hopefully cover for the wing back on attack, we've got a deep line playmaker on defend in Pascal, and he can definitely do that role quite comfortably, to be honest, so he should be a good player for you there. We also have a ball winning midfielder on support. He's actually more of a Carrillo or a box to box midfielder or Mesler, but in terms of suiting our tactics, a ball winning midfielder support suits us best, and he can play that role very comfortably, and he's also got the attributes for it, so it's perfect for us. He comes deep to get the ball too, which helps, and he also gets into the box opposition area, which helps us, especially as a ball winning midfielder, so complements it well. Playing a fullback on support here doesn't necessarily complement the inside forward, but we're just kind of alternating both flanks, so we don't want both flanks having the same sort of style of attack, I suppose, or penetration or whatever. So we've gone with inside forward on attack here, inside forward on support here, wing back on attack here, and a full back on support here, so we're not caught out too often. We're playing a 4-2-3-1, very attacking, like I mentioned, so you will get caught out a lot on the counter yourself. Trequartista just suits the target man on attack. They kind of work well together. He'll be allowed to roam freely and sort of get into nice little pockets of space. This formation is definitely not the best in terms of trying to keep possession. I feel like 4-3-3 is a bit better. 4-2-3-1 is good enough though, but it's just to try and make the team as comfortable as possible, and also playing our best players in their best positions. That's kind of it, but I think eventually you do want to build into something a bit better. I feel like with a team of your stature, you should try and work into a 4-1-4-1 formation, but that has to happen eventually and slowly. You don't have any defensive midfielders, for example, and your wingers are more of inside forwards, they're not wingers, things like that you have to try and consider. So yeah, Trequartista is kind of self-explanatory, like we mentioned. He's just going to be really the main risky player sort of thing, and he's just going to try and get into little pockets of space and hopefully be able to find other players, such as the target man ahead of him on attack. And we don't need him dropping in, because he's just going to come into his teammate here, Davey, his space basically. So that's kind of it. That's the thinking behind it. Areas of concern are already pointed out with this bit being of concern, this bit here. The reason with the 4-2-3-1 is that why you get so caught out of getting caught out on the counter is because you're not playing a defensive midfielder, so that's a bit of an issue. You also got these areas are kind of where your weakness is, so you have to kind of keep an eye on that. If your opposition team is playing an attacking midfielder, it might be smart to have one of these players, or even both of them, marking that attacking midfielder, that way that you don't get exposed in the space here, because that's where the opposition attacking midfielder operates in. The wing back being very attacking, of course, leaves naturally some space in behind, but hopefully that will be covered with the rest of the defenders, these three here who aren't being too attacking, and you also have your deep line playmaker playing defensively. So that's just kind of it. You definitely need 2 more tactics, which we're not going to go through. That's kind of down to personal preference. But if you ask me, there's 2 ways of going about it. You either have 2 other formations that play with the same instructions and tactics sort of thing, but just different formations to work with. For example, you might want to try and hold on to a result, so you want to play a 4-1-4-1 and just kind of be a bit less attacking, or you want to really go for it, so you play a 4-4-2, for example, that type of thing. Or there's the other way, which is what I do, which is kind of stick with everything the same, but play with a containment mentality and an overload mentality for the different match strategies, and kind of just add a couple more team instructions to hope to really push forward or to really lock up the defense. So that's kind of the tactics. In terms of the team report, we can have a quick look at it. The weaknesses in particular are the concern. So your staff definitely do need improvement, but the areas that are worrying are decision making, passing, first touch, and strength. You can definitely do with that, but I feel like a lot of this squad does need to improve, so a lot of these things should go when you do bring in better players. But there are some nice strengths here. You know, you got some youth prospects apparently. Midfield depth is definitely a good thing. You have some apparently good players in terms of leadership. Overall depth is good as well, according to the team report. So yeah, I mean, some good things here. So, you know, try and work with your strengths. In terms of the staff, we already talked about where you need to improve. It's kind of just everywhere really, and I don't want to go into too much depth about who to sign, who not to. This is sort of a team guide rather than a staff guide. I feel like that's kind of depending on who you find. Training, team training I always have on high during pre-season and keep it on balanced and have match tactics. Then during the season it goes back down to average, and match tactics is changed according to what my scout found in terms of the opposition report. You know, depending, sometimes it's attacking movement, sometimes it's defensive positioning. Considering you're a weaker team in the division, it should be defensive positioning would be the majority time. Medical center, schedule, you could probably do with better friendlies than this, to be honest, and maybe a couple less as well. You do have some tough fixtures in terms of Chelsea from the get-go, Everton, Burnley, you even have Tottenham straight away. So, you know, you kind of have to try and come out unscathed in this part here. Competitions we already talked about, but we can have a quick look at where we're predicted to end, and that is 19th. So apparently we're a tiny bit better than Huddersfield, but you know, you never know, maybe we could bring in someone else instead of us if we take Swansea's spot, for example, or maybe Newcastle aren't as good as they think they are, things like that. Where does that leave us? We talked about competitions. Scouting system has been completely revamped really, and you can definitely overtake the responsibility yourself, but I've left it for my chief scout. It just kind of makes sense to let him do his job. Scouting focus, just kind of keep it on general the whole time. It depends on your preferences, but general all the time is my advice, and then during transfer windows you can do the short-term ones and try and find players for your team. Recruitment, I think that's kind of self-explanatory. Your scouting budget's adjusted according to your actual budget. So apparently you have 17 million to spend already, but that's quite high up, and we'll talk more about that, but you can definitely give some more money to your scouting budget if you wanted to. Another thing to keep an eye out on is actually your packages. So you're apparently on the best package. Your senior package is for the world, so your scouts are finding players all over the world, and that's definitely really good. My suggestions obviously do always world and world for both youth and senior packages, but obviously that costs a bit of money, so you do have to keep an eye on your finances, and you don't have to wonder necessarily too much about, you know, the money. You don't have to worry too much. I feel like because it says once, you know, you run out of money for being able to pay for world packages, it kind of just drops down itself, or it'll warn you and then you can drop it down, but you can definitely adjust the budget for that. So transfers, I think we can have a quick look. Okay, apparently there's someone who's joining us in January, and that's a striker. You might want to scout him, but that's another thing to consider. Defensive forward, I don't think he's much of a target man, which is the role that we're playing with, but maybe you can readjust the defensive forward. That's just another thing to think about. But in terms of the board, we can adjust it. So my suggestion is always to have it. Let's talk about this later, actually. So club general things, we've never really been in the Premier League in quite some time, up until 1995 at least. But yeah, I mean, try and make the most out of it. It's a really interesting challenge to take over Brighton, and hopefully maybe you can secure Premier League football, and that way if you'll get a ton of money after that, and you can seriously improve your squad. In terms of the generals, your rivals are Crystal Palace, so you will face them off in the Premier League, and the same goes with Southampton. Portsmouth, not really, but yeah, Crystal Palace is a derby, so that's another game to keep an eye on. Winning those type of games can definitely help you. Facilities, you've got some decent facilities, you can certainly improve, but they're quite good. You might want to work on the youth bit of your squad a little bit more by the looks of things. History wise, Sky Bet League 1 trophies, Community Shield, Sky Bet League 2, but you've never won the Championship or even the Premier League, so you might want to add some more trophies in your cabinet, like the FA Cup or the League Cup. Winning the League Cup would be such a big boost for your squad, because don't take that competition lightly. Winning it sends you into Europa League football, and even if you do get relegated into Championship, if you aren't successful in staying in the Premier League, you've got Europa League football, so you'll still get a ton of money. You can reinvest that money once more, and you suddenly, when you do get back to the Premier League, you should have players who are very ready for division. You can go back firing. Board. So finally we're back at the board. You can see where they're asking you to invest in. There's pretty much everywhere that needs some better staff. There's no scouting range. Scouting budget could improve possibly. But yeah, we're on 17 million for the money, but you've only got 14 million wage budget. And what I like to do with the budgets is normally have it about the middle, but leaning towards transfer budget. So if you ask me, you only have 10 million to spend in truth. So that's something else to keep in mind. But in terms of club issues, there's no real philosophies, so you should be okay. You can play any style of football, and that's nice to have in terms of advantage. Finances, though, you are 33 million in the red. I had no clue that's true, but yeah, maybe spending that 10 million might not be a good idea. You might be better off just bringing in loanies the whole time, or investing your money in securing free transfers. You can definitely get free transfer players of ability up to good ability. You won't necessarily, it's very rare to find someone of leading ability who would like to sign with you. Normally they always get their contracts renewed, but up to about good. So you could be a mid-table team full of good players of the full Premier League size, and that's, you know, money not even spent at all, basically just wages. So always keep an eye out on the free transfer market, especially when you're with a team like Brighton. But yeah, that's a huge concern, the 33 million you have. But you have a huge gift loan, and apparently you're paying it off from 2023 for 20 years. But that's a, you know, much further down thing to to worry about. But your balance should definitely improve being in the Premier League, and that's why it's even more important for you to survive. Your transfer budget will certainly improve as well, but you just need to try and get out of the red as soon as possible. If you find a bunch of free transfers already available now, you might be better off selling some of your players just to make money, not even just because you don't like them, or not even because, like I mentioned, they're not ready for the first team. Under 23s and under 18s players to look out for. There's a couple of them, really. There's, anyone up until about 4 stars in terms of black. Black, this sort of unknown one is actually 3 stars, but can maybe become 4 stars. That's kind of the players to look out for. So you might want to consider someone like Jason. He'd slot into your team very easily. He's a ball-winning midfielder already, so perfectly suited. Poacher is a bit of a concern, but maybe you could retrain him into something else, or you could adjust your tactics for him. And maybe create a different type of tactic to suit him, maybe like a 4-4-2 for example, so by the time he's ready for first team, you already got a spot for him ready. A winger in Henrique, but you might be better off trying to retrain him as an inside forward. He does have decent vision and passing. Finishing might need some work, but his decision making is not an issue. It's off the ball, maybe that's a bit of concern too. But if you ask me, he is a bit more suited to the winger position, I suppose. But his crossing definitely needs work. I feel like a winger who can't cross is kind of very pointless, because it's in their team, the player instruction to cross. It's not like it doesn't say that, for example. But anyways, another one is Sufyan, inside forward. Definitely will slot into your team very easily if you can improve him. Advanced playmaker, maybe try and retrain him into trequartista. He doesn't seem too comfortable with it, but his attributes should... having said that, he's much better as an advanced playmaker. And that just leaves us with Christian, Walton and Alice as well. Goalkeeper and defensive fullback. Defensive fullbacks are never my, what I like to have. But maybe he can eventually become... No, not really. He won't really be a wingback or a fullback for that matter. Teamwork needs some improvement. Maybe you can try and get someone to tutor him. That's kind of the youngsters to look out for, but bear in mind, sometimes these players don't live up to potential. Some of these players surpass their potential and become one of your first teamers, so you never really know. Just keep sending them out on loan to clubs who only have great facilities in terms of training facilities and youth facilities. And if you can have a look at the staff as well, if the staff is good enough, your player will improve as well. So those are the things to consider, and hopefully every time they come back they're better in terms of ability and they can join you in the Premier League. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of it. I feel like we've covered just about everything. So there's a link in the box, in the description box for Patreon. I'd really appreciate anyone who supports me on Patreon. But that's kind of it for today's episode. So if you did enjoy it, of course, please do hit the like button and subscribe for more Daily Football Manager 2018 content. And as always, guys, thank you all very, very much for watching.